Good, okay. My name is Jessica Beverly, and I'm here wearing my Environmental Defenders of McHenry County hat today. I've been a clean energy advocate for some time, including my time at the Sierra Club, and in my current role as the Vice President of the Environmental Defenders of McHenry County. I want to welcome everybody to the McHenry County Solar Summit today. It's part of the Defenders Best Management Practices Talks and Tours that the Defenders have been doing for more than 2 years now. These talks and tours invite our leadership, including county, municipality, and township officials, to come learn more about how to become stewards of their environments and to leverage their roles to make decisions that reduce the use of fossil fuels, conserve energy, and taxpayer dollars. For those of you unfamiliar with the Defenders, we are a 53-year-old and McHenry County-based environmental nonprofit dedicated to environmental preservation, education, and conservation. We've worked with many of you in various capacities for recycling drives, styrofoam recycling, and in other ways to help conserve the land and resources of our wonderful county. I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists and allow for them to expand upon that introduction when they begin their portion of the programming. Today we're going to focus on the current state of solar in McHenry County. That includes the process of solar development at the county level, how the county manages landscaping once a solar farm is approved, what agrivoltaics means for the county and at the state level, and how solar can be done to leverage benefits in our community. I should also disclose that I'm a member of the Zoning Board of Appeals and that we'll be touching on common public comments both in favor of and in opposition to solar developments on private and public land. I've personally heard these comments, and we are addressing many of them in the slides and throughout the presentation. Before we begin, I want to only say this once: this is not a public hearing. This is a private event. It features county staff and private individuals, and it's put on by the Environmental Defenders. There's no entitlement to public comment, only questions for the panel at my discretion. If your comments are not phrased in the form of a question and this becomes a pulpit for your personal views, you might be asked to leave. This is an event that features a Q&A and is not a bully pulpit for personal opinions. We will conduct this program with prepared slides and attempt to address many of the questions that were asked at registration. If there's time remaining, we will allow for audience questions, and there is contact information for everyone available here, and you can always reach out and follow up as you would like. That said, I'm going to introduce our panelists. Kim Charlo is county planner, and she's a resident expert on staff regarding the Illinois Solar Siting Act. She's also an expert on our internal ordinances regarding solar siting and development, and she does all of our ZBA hearings for solar. She's an amazing resource for our county. Scott Kuykendall is the Water Resources Specialist for McHenry County. You may have seen him at the Water Forum or at one of the countless events, including the County Fair and Monarch Festivals, where he does public outreach and education on groundwater resource management. Scott is the preeminent expert and invaluable resource to the county on the benefits of native plantings, land resource management, and he is an amazing volunteer for our local nonprofit, our local environmental nonprofits. He's going to be available after this talk to offer tours of the front gardens, including all of the native plantings and all of the hard work that he does to maintain them. To my right is John Carson. He's founding partner for Trajectory Energy Partners, an Illinois, Maryland, and Pennsylvania solar developer. He's from Wisconsin and grew up on a family farm. Rhodes Scholar finalist, former Peace Corps volunteer, and he has his own Wikipedia page. John has been part of the transition to clean energy for more than 10 years, and he co-founded Trajectory Energy Partners in 2017. He and his team have been active throughout the state in producing utility scale and community solar projects that legitimately benefit the community. He's been an invaluable resource for the Environmental Defenders since 2017, and he's done many talks and tours with our membership regarding the benefits of solar, and is more recently in the process of developing projects within our county. Trajectory has electrified many more projects throughout the state. Our county board members and zoning board of appeals members of the county have celebrated John's expertise and welcomed the community benefits that his projects bring to our area. And I personally look forward to helping him share his wealth of knowledge about this process of solar development, the nuts and bolts of what a solar farm can do for the community. And I can't wait for him to answer the tough engineering questions that so often go unanswered throughout the public hearing process during solar farm approvals. All that said, I welcome our panelists to expand upon their introductions, but we should get things started. First, I'd like to ask Kim Charlo to discuss solar in McHenry County. I'd like for you to touch upon how many solar applications have been processed in recent years, what changes have been made, and what the process is from planning and development through zoning and the county board thereafter.
Thank you, Jessica. Okay, so think we want to just start with the basics here. So McHenry County has seen 52 commercial solar energy facilities be approved through our county board since 2018 when we first saw these coming to us. 9 of the approved sites alone were applied for this calendar year. One of them did get voided out due to being forcibly annexed during that process. 6 of the approved sites are currently operational. They've received their building permits and have been fully functional, and they're at 8.625 megawatts total of energy produced from those sites. 6 of the approved sites have been permitted and are either currently under construction or are awaiting construction shortly. And then 3 of the approved sites are currently under building permit review, and those should be issued probably within the next week or 2, so those will be the next ones to be developed. Looking at it from a township side here, Coral Township definitely by far has the most sites, 298 acres that are approved for conditional use permits. The most acreage is in Riley Township. Some of you might be aware of Duke Energy. That is about 1,900 acres of that was that site, and we only have 3 townships where we have not had any approved, which would be McHenry, Burton, and Algonquin. And then there's just a map here so you can see the locations where they fall. So all of the red dots out there are the approved conditional use permits that have not yet been permitted. The dark blue dots out there are fully functional sites that have received a certificate of occupancy. The 3 yellow dots out there are the 3 projects that I mentioned are still in building permit review right now and nearing completion of that process. And then the green are the ones that we have issued the permits on, but they have not yet received their completion. So the Illinois Public Act 102-1123, many of you have probably heard of that, was passed by the state last year in January. It does mandate counties in Illinois to approve conditional use permits for commercial solar energy facilities, provided that they meet the minimum siting standards that are outlined in this public act. Some general regulations that it does indicate in that public act are that there is a 20-foot height limitation for solar panels, a 50-foot setback from road right-of-way, 50-foot setback from boundary lines of non-participating property, and 150-foot setback from the nearest point of an outside wall of a residence on a non-participating property. And then the facility perimeter must be enclosed by fencing, a minimum of 7 feet in compliance with the National Electric Code. Counties may not set regulations that are more restrictive than the state standards, but we are allowed to add any kind of conditions that are relating to vegetative screening, anything that might make things more pleasing to neighbors. We could have condition on maybe the style of fencing, as long as it's not being more restrictive than what the state law is indicating. As far as our step-by-step process for solar, once a zoning application for conditional use permit is submitted, along with that, they must submit a fully executed agricultural impact mitigation agreement from the Illinois Department of Agriculture, along with an EcoCat report from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. That's an endangered species consultation. And then an NRI report from the McHenry Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District. So once we have that all in hand, we schedule the public hearing, and at the public hearing, the Zoning Board of Appeals makes a recommendation based off of the testimony given, and then that goes to the county board for the final vote. Once the county board has approved the conditional use permit, then it's able to go to the building permit phase. During that time is when they will be submitting their drain tile survey, wetland delineation, interconnection agreement, emergency management plan that's forwarded to the fire districts for their approval, a landscape maintenance and monitoring plan, and a decommissioning bond. So after all of that has been reviewed and approved, along with all the construction plans, then begins construction of the facility, inspections by the county, and then a certificate of completion so that the site can be fully operational. Once it is operational, there is 24/7 remote monitoring by the solar operator so that if anything goes wrong with the panels or if there's any kind of emergency, they are alerted to it during operation. County staff, my department, we do go out once a year to ensure compliance with the conditional uses. There are a list of conditions in every conditional use that need to be met, so we're going out once a year to make sure that those are in compliance, that there's weed control in place, that there is no cracked panels laying on the ground, anything like that. We're going out to make sure compliance is being met. Also, every year, the solar operators are required to submit to our department an annual monitoring and maintenance report that is reviewed by our staff to make sure that all of the maintenance of the plantings and everything is all in order and being kept up with. And then we haven't gotten to this point yet, but at the end of the project life, typically about 25 to 30 years is when the decommissioning of the facility would take place. Everything would be removed, including the panels, the driveway, the equipment pad, fencing, unless there's an agreement with the landowner to leave any of that in place. If you are looking for any additional information about any upcoming proposals, we do have a meeting portal on the county's website that has all of our zoning hearings information, and you can go there to see if there's any upcoming solar hearings. Contact me anytime. I do have cards with me. Feel free to reach out, and I can always let you know what's coming up. Otherwise, you may see some zoning signs around the county to let you know of an upcoming public hearing on a property, or legal notices that are published in the Northwest Herald. And we will be creating a web page on the county's website specifically for solar development. So that's going to include any upcoming projects, what the status is of current projects, and anything that comes down the pipeline from the state, any changes to the laws or ordinances will also be updated there. But I think that's about it. I know I went through it very quickly because I'm nervous. But if anybody has any questions for me.
I'm going to ask you some questions based on some of the things that we hear at the zoning hearings.
Yes.
So one of the questions that I know that other folks have, has Duke started construction in Riley Township?
They have not.
Okay. And then can you go back to that slide on the process there, the solar process?
Mm-hmm.
So from the time that a solar developer submits a zoning application through the building permit application, how long does that usually take?
So the actual zoning process to get a conditional use permit is typically about 2 to 3 months. And the building permit process, probably about a month or two, depending on, a lot of times it can take a while until they're ready to actually submit for the building permit, but that would be about another month or two for that completion as well.
And then if you could go to your slide that talks about the inspections that the county does, do the fire districts do their own inspections?
They do.
Periodically?
Yes, and there is training that's involved for the fire department staff by the solar developers to make sure that they understand where everything is located, the equipment, the shutoffs, things like that, if there was to be an emergency out there, so.
Okay, and would the county do more than an annual inspection if there were complaints from the neighbors about the state of the place or anything like that?
Yes, anytime we receive a complaint, we would follow up to see if there is a violation.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to transition to Scott Kuykendall to discuss what happens once the solar farm is approved and installed with regard to the landscape management plans.
So my name is Scott Kuykendall. I'm the Water Resources Specialist for the county. So I help oversee the county's scientific research into water resources. A big part of what I focus on is the connection between our land use, our surface water, and our groundwater, because they are all interconnected. And then I do a lot of public education and outreach on all the topics related to water resources. And then I also help oversee the native vegetation component of our solar farms. So this is a solar farm here in McHenry County. This is the solar farm off of McGuire Road in Alden. So I think we have 6 sites that have been built in the county that have native vegetation in various degrees of development. Yeah, thank you very much. Mm-hmm. So native vegetation is really important, and not just for solar farms, but in general. Native plants in the Midwest have deep root structures. This is an evolutionary adaptation in prairies. So largely due to fire. So fire would move through the area and burn the upper parts of the plant, but the deep root structure is what allows that to live. And so native plants in our area form a deep root structure. This is a illustration that was done by a ecologist named Heidi Ventura, and it shows both the above ground of various species and then the below ground root structure of various species. Conversely, turfgrass roots typically only go down about an inch or two. And most of our non-native species, since they are didn't evolve with fire, are very short rooted as well. So our native plants really are very unique in having these deep root structures. And this plays an important role in managing stormwater. This is a map or an exhibit that Kim had showed me. And so it shows the root structure of various plants. And once you start seeing just how extensive these root systems are, you can start to understand how this plays a role in stormwater. So the native plants restore soil health, which also helps the soil to hold water. So between the above ground, does this have a laser? So between the above ground mass, the root structure in the soil, and then the healthy soil in that soil profile, this is an extremely large sponge that can hold an enormous amount of water. It also helps stabilize soils, prevent erosion, restore soil health, manage stormwater, reduce flooding, promote groundwater recharge. So in McHenry County, we're 100% reliant on groundwater for our drinking water. So this is one way we can help restore the groundwater during the life of the solar farm. It stores an enormous amount of carbon within this root structure. It'll provide pollinator habitat throughout the life of the solar farm, and it can also create aesthetic benefits that can help make it a more aesthetically pleasing neighbor to have. So on top of the benefit of stabilizing the soil, you're getting all of these benefits on top of that. So when you're doing native vegetation, you really need to be working with professionals who know what they're doing. Native vegetation is very different than conventional turf grass. Most of our conventional landscaping is there because it's easy to do. And we've kind of forgotten how native plants work in our standard contractors. So it's really important to work with contractors with significant experience of successfully working with native species. If you are hiring somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, you are paying for that contractor's education. And you may be throwing your money away because they don't know what they're doing. You'll end up with increased maintenance costs, and you can be giving solar farm developments a black eye if you don't successfully do this. And this is important to understand as far as ending up with increased maintenance costs. It's one of the benefits to the solar farms for putting in native plants is you're taking control of what's going in there. You are intentionally selecting short-statured native plants that can hold their own throughout that life of that solar farm. If you don't put things in there like that, other things are going to move in, and they're not going to be things that you want. Our soils have been beat up for over 100 years and have over 100 years of invasive species moving in. And so most of our non-native species will be getting up extremely high, which then will interfere with energy production. So by intentionally planting native vegetation that can hold their own and provide all the benefits that we just talked about and limit the amount of disruption to solar production, you really are taking control of things. If you don't get it done right, though, you are not going to derive the benefits that we're talking about, and you'll end up fighting weed for 30 years. That is in nobody's best interest. So it is really important to hire contractors that know what they're doing. When you're selecting species, you are going to be selecting species that typically get 3 feet or lower as part of their standard height. Now, you can have things that occasionally get a little bit higher. The time that the plants will cause an interference is when the panels are at their lowest level. Now, most solar farms that have been coming in have a single axis, meaning it's following the sun from the east in the morning and rotating throughout the day. And so the only time that panel is going to be close to the ground is either at the very beginning of the day or at the very end of the day. And so it's, keep that in perspective when you're planning your plantings out. The other thing is since the panels are rotating, it's providing a certain amount of sunlight to the entire planting area around the panels. Now, if it's fixed panels, that's a completely different story, and you'll have to adjust your plant mix accordingly. So you'll be planning your mixes based on the sunlight needs. How much sun will those plants be getting in and around your solar array? The soil type. We've got clay soils, sandy soils, loamy soils. Different plants do better in certain types of soils. And once again, that's why you really need a contractor that knows what they're doing. You can't rely on these basic plant lists that are out there. To be honest, early on especially, I was getting submittals with IDOT mixes that had plants that would grow to be 8 feet tall. You can't rely on just standard mixes. You really need a mix specific to your site. And that also includes soil moisture. Most of our solar farms are going in upland areas where the soils are relatively dry. But as those easy sites get done, we are going to see more and more where you're going to have wetter soils intermixed. So you may need different mixes based on the soil moisture. This is not an ecological restoration, and I do want to make sure that people understand this. This is a temporary land use, so this is, for all practical purposes, a temporary cover. We do a lot of restoration work, and I'm involved in a lot of these projects. We are trying to restore the land to pre-settlement conditions. That is not what we're trying to do here. So you want to focus on what is commonly referred to as workhorse species, but these are species that kind of hold their own over time. You kind of want to avoid rare or overly conservative species that will only grow in high quality, undisturbed sites. We don't need extensive plant lists. But we do need plant lists that have enough diversity so that if some of those species don't make it, you don't have these gaping voids. So you can't have a list with just 6 species. You need to have a robust enough plant list to survive over time. But we're not looking for very complex plant lists with tons of species. We want good species suitable for that site and enough biodiversity to help it maintain its integrity over time. You may need multiple lists. We already alluded to this, but this can also be under panels. If you've got fixed panels, it's going to be a very different plant list than if you have rotating panels. We are seeing, and this is pretty intuitive, but we're seeing the vegetation that is getting more sun performing better than the ones that are directly underneath the panels. Now, I do think that some of the performance problems we're seeing directly under the panels are also due to how they prep the sites. If they don't completely kill off the vegetation underneath those panels, when they spread their seed, it's hitting vegetation as opposed to bare ground. And I do think that's part of the problem that has been observed on some of these sites. But you need to be working with professionals who know what they're doing to come up with plant lists that meet the conditions on your site as well as the goals of your particular project. Once again, you need to have professionals who know what they're doing, because the seeds of native plants vary immensely. A lot of the seeds are almost microscopic, and some of the other seeds are very heavy. And back in my consulting days, I would find sites where they had spent literally tens of thousands of dollars on seed and had contractors through value engineering not know what they're doing, and they'd put it all in a bucket, mix it up, and then go and throw it up in the air. And what would happen is the light, fluffy stuff would fly onto the neighbor's property. The heavy seed would drop in clumps, and everything else would kind of disappear. And so you're just wasting money. You really need contractors who know what they're doing, know how to apply the different types of seeds. And some of our native seeds actually need a certain amount of stratification or scarification. So we'll need to be in below 0 temperatures for a certain period of time in order for that germination to be possible. If you have contractors that don't know what they're doing, you're going to be paying for seed, and it's not going to be prepared right, and you're just going to be throwing money away. That is, not what we want to see happen at all. People who know their seeds are essential to getting this done right. I think I already talked about this, but due to pressure from aggressive weeds and disturbed soil, site preparation and implementation during that first 5 years is critical. If you don't prepare the site properly and install the plants properly and attack it during that first 5 years, you're going to be fighting weeds for the rest of the time. But if you do it right, your maintenance is going to be minimal. And this has been proven over and over again. If you haven't participated in our other talks and tours, we have them online, but the village of Algonquin does a great job demonstrating how their small amount of turf grass that they have to manage is many, many times more expensive to manage than their vast areas of native landscaping. So this is proven over and over again, but you have to do it right from the start. We do have performance standards in the county. I'm not going to expect you to read this, but what we have is for the first 5 years, progressively incremental improvements. So the first year you have to have 90% cover, and that can include the cover crop that you put down, and that is to provide stabilization. We can't have a construction site with bare ground. You need to stabilize that site. By the second year, at least 50% of the vegetation present shall be non-native, non-invasive species. So 50% the first year or second year, 60% the third year, 70% the fourth year, and 75% the fifth year. So you're progressively improving your performance standards over time, and this follows standard practices in the native vegetation industry, but I have scaled down the requirements significantly. This is really the bare minimum of what you want to do to avoid failure on your site. And this really is easily accomplished by any native contractor that knows what they're doing. So McHenry County has required our performance standards on all solar farms as part of our permit review process. This includes requirements for the review of the native species lists, the installation, monitoring, and management plans, our site inspections, and annual reporting. But as Kim had talked about, new state laws passed in January of 2023 limit the county's ability for us to enforce our performance standards on newer projects. So the projects that have received their conditional use permit prior to January 27th, 2023 are still subject to the county's performance standards. After that, we can't enforce our performance standards, but we are still strongly recommending our native plants and performance standards in order for them to avoid having to provide detention. Now, it doesn't mean that you're automatically going to require detention if you don't do natives, but you will have to demonstrate how your project is not exceeding the thresholds for detention. Whereas if you do native plants and follow the guidelines, you can get through the process much more quickly. So hopefully that makes sense. And if anybody is interested, I do have copies of our performance standards printed out, so feel free to grab a copy. And I do have a plant list of species that have been used on solar farms in McHenry County to date. So the new regulations do require native plants. So these are the state regulations. They do require native plants, but it's only in accordance with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources Solar Site Pollinator Scorecard. And this is the website, but you can just Google Illinois Solar Site Scorecard and it'll lead you right to it. And we have a lot of things coming up, and it's pretty exciting. So a lot of people have heard about or are interested in solar grazing. This is an evolving industry, so it is not something that is well established, but we've been working with the American Solar Grazing Association and others to figure out how to implement this here in McHenry County. The American Solar Grazing Association, if you are interested in this, I highly recommend visiting the site or even becoming a member to view a lot of their videos. You do have to be a member, but it's they just have so much information on it. Now, the sheep that are being grazed on the site don't actually live on the site. So they have people that have the sheep and will take them from site to site and do different types of grazing strategies. And we do actually have a couple here today that represent the sheep industry. What's the name of your farm?
Watson Farms in DeKalb, Illinois.
Yeah, so Watson Farms in DeKalb, Illinois. And so if we do have questions on this during our Q&A period, I may defer to them on that. But this really is a pretty exciting field, but we need to know what we're doing. You can't, when they first started talking about solar grazing, I had the solar farm developers calling me, asking me how to do it, or their contractors trying to ask me how to do it. They need to know what they're doing when they come into us. And it is being, it's an evolving field and it is being developed. I'm very excited about this. So I think that is all I had.
I'm going to throw some questions
Sure.
at you. So can you talk a little bit about how natives planted on solar farms help adjoining landowners who have complaints and concerns about flooding?
Yeah, well, and I think I alluded to it. I think we had good visuals there, but a solar farm is going to be infinitely less of a stormwater source than an agricultural field or any other type of neighbor. If they properly establish native vegetation, any drop of water that lands there basically will stay there. One of the things we were concerned about initially when the solar farms were first coming in 5-6 years ago was the drip line. That if you are along a house or anywhere that does have a drip line, you'll see it's devoid of vegetation. Part of the reason for us initially looking at native vegetation as a requirement was for that. So as the water lands, it's hitting the mass above ground, so the stems, the leaves, or the duff from the previous year, and that is breaking up the velocity of that droplet. We refer to it as energy dissipation, and that breaks it up into much smaller droplets that much more easily infiltrate down into the ground. A certain amount of that water is going to be evapotranspired, and there's actually studies looking to see or demonstrate that that evapotranspiration from the native plants actually cools the local environment around the solar panels and improves performance. I don't know that study is complete yet, but that's one of the things they're looking at. So from a neighbor standpoint, a solar farm is going to be a quiet and stable neighbor as far as water goes.
Okay. That said, this comes up often in the zoning hearings that people are worried about increased flooding, drain tiles being broken, and things like that. And so what you're saying is that properly maintained and managed native plantings will actually reduce on-site flooding as compared to row crops?
Absolutely, and we do require tiles to be repaired as part of the process. That is just first and foremost something that is done.
And there's a post-construction inspection for that?
Yes, yep. So they have to map it out before they even come in. We require a drain tile survey, and then they do have to do the repairs demonstrated, and that is part of our inspection process.
And of the 6 solar farms that we have operational already, there isn't any problems with flooding or anything like that on the neighborhood sites?
No.
You talked a lot about hiring responsible and educated contractors. Is there any requirement that the contractors be certified in a certain way to work in our county?
That is one of the challenges. In all honesty, there is no ecological certification. So you need to do your homework. And as a county, we can't suggest go to this company or that company. So the onus is on you. But I do want to make a side note here, because I do think that there's actually value in properly establishing native plants. If I had the money and was more entrepreneurial minded, I would have already done this. But solar farms are planting native plants. That is a seed source for the next generation of plants. This native plants can actually be a profit center for the solar farms if they do it right. You have to make sure that you're getting the seed from the right sources and doing it properly. But if you design it right and you're working with a company that can actually process the seed and sell it, this is a seed source. Even without solar farms planting native plants, because of the growing interest in native plants, it's becoming harder and harder for the seed companies and the plant companies to meet demand. And so there is a need for additional seed. But if we want to plant natives across the entire state, there are not enough seeds in the state to do that now. And so there is value in a solar company implementing this properly and using this as a whole nother profit center for their developments. So any of you solar farm developers out there, hopefully light bulbs are going off. And the reason I'm particularly interested in this is that two things. One is that provides incentive for the solar farm developers to do it right from the start without me wagging my finger and saying you need to do it a certain way. It'll be a self-perpetuating system. Secondly, the people that would need to come up and provide that support would be a whole nother industry. You know, a restoration company that has PhDs doing a lot of the work is far more advanced than what we need for this level of work. Like I said, this is not a restoration. So I see a whole new industry evolving to provide the restoration or the maintenance and monitoring practices at a price point that's more conducive to solar farms. So I really think that if solar farms embrace native plants and use this as a profit center, a lot of the stuff will take care of itself, and it'll be beneficial for all.
You also briefly touched on the importance of getting the right seed mix.
Yep.
And when developers come before the zoning board, they don't always have their seed mixes or their land management plan done because they're not required to until the building permitting stage. You're able to offer them guidance and assistance and make sure that they're doing these seed mixes correctly before installation? To
a certain degree. So I'm not going to be prescriptive and look at the clay soils and all that. What I'm focusing on is, you know, just in broad brush strokes, this plant reaches 8 feet tall. It is not suitable for solar farms. This plant only grows to be 36 inches tall. That is more suitable for solar farms. But ultimately, it's up to the developer to be responsible. If they're not meeting the performance standards, then we're not providing the sign-off. And you know, the guidance that I'm providing is really looking at the height, or you know, if there are certain factors that are obvious as far as like being overly aggressive or things like that, I'll make comments about that. But I'm not looking at it from the soil type and things along those lines.
You're not doing their soil testing for them?
You got it.
Yeah,
you
right.
got it.
So stressing the importance of hiring a good contractor.
Yep.
One more thing, it's kind of a mystery to a lot of us about what happens once the farm is up and if the vegetation isn't taking, like what happens with your inspections when you see something that's not succeeding? Well,
we do have somewhat limited ability to you know, do enforcement. So, you know, if in a, like say, Village of Algonquin, if they are doing a detention basin and it doesn't work, they're going to go in and kill off all the vegetation that's in there and start over. I don't have the ability to require that. You know, we do require that that first 5 years of monitoring before we provide sign-off. And then they're required to provide a report every 5 years indicating how it's doing. But beyond that, our power to enforce is somewhat limited.
And that's at the county level, but if it were in municipality, they could write their own performance?
Absolutely, yeah. And so, yeah, municipalities are not subject to the same limitations that we are but based on that state legislation. That applies to counties. So if a municipality wants to, you know, have a solar farm come in and like I don't have direct knowledge, but the Village of Marengo has had, or City of Marengo has had many solar farms come in. It's my understanding that they do require native plants, and so they really could impose any type of requirements that they would want to. But we can't do that in the county.
Can they make it more strict than the state?
Yeah,
they can.
They can. We can't.
Municipalities can write their own ordinance. They could adopt our previous vegetation management plan requirements and really hold developers to them.
They could. And I recommend it. Like I said, you know, this is not intended to be punitive in any way, shape, or form. The solar farm companies, they aren't in the business of establishing native vegetation. How would they even put something out to bid? So this is intended to be a document that they could use to create a bid packet to put out to bid to contractors to bid on. And then the other thing is to hold those contractors' feet to the fire if it doesn't meet their criteria. So if they are not meeting performance standards and it's part of their contract to meet these performance standards, then the contractors would be responsible for going out and doing any adaptive management strategies to bring it back up to compliance.
And landowners could also write these requirements into their leases with developers and have their own enforcement mechanisms and penalties for failure to thrive, right?
That's not something I've ever considered, but I like the idea.
Yeah. Yeah, they can. Well, thank you, Scott.
Sure thing. And if you have questions afterwards.
Okay, so we're holding questions to the end.
I was
right?
going to hold questions to the end.
Okay.
Would it be most appropriate to ask a couple right now before we move
It
on?
just seems like if you're the person that's doing it, we had a question, it would be easier for me, but
Okay.
I mean, so I have a question. So when they're putting in these native fields, and what I know about prairies, I'm sure a number of people here have them in their house, it is critical, and you mentioned that first year to smother off or kill all that stuff out. Do most solar fields that are successful, I don't know if it's 6R now or whatever, then do they get that field established, that native field established prior to starting solar construction, or is it joint?
So you mean, do they seed it before they
Yes,
put the
because to
solar
me,
panels in?
that's what's gonna be
There has been
successful.
talk about that, but that is not the way it's been done to
You
date.
can't burn or anything else then, like that first year, ideally, mow it and then burn it. And if
Yeah.
you can't do that, you're really, those things you're trying to address in 5 years, good luck.
Well,
hard.
the private contractors know what they're doing. That is common. I've worked on
And they'll tell you, like
mitigation
you're
sites.
saying, that's why they're having a hard time getting them. And I have a family member who's in that business, and he's like, we're doing a couple, but to tell you the truth, he's like, it's hard. And,
There are several obstacles. So one of the barriers that I see, and maybe John, you can talk about the design of the solar farms, but some of the solar farms you can mow up and down the aisle unobstructed. Some of the single access have the turning drive shafts above ground. And so you have no way of taking your equipment into the middle. And that is a huge, huge challenge, because now people are having to low crawl underneath the drive shaft with all their equipment and then use a rotary flail mower instead of a driving mower. So there are lots of challenges. If you didn't have to have the drive shaft above ground, that because I know that some of them don't, and it's much easier. But that's also where if the solar farm is doing this for seed production, they would be much more likely to go in and seed it beforehand, go in and put the panels in, and then reseed a second time. Because that would definitely bump up your performance. But that is time consuming and costly. And that's not something that we're able to require. But I think that would, if a solar farm is looking to make that, to produce such seed, I think they would be much more likely to do
It puts the
that.
county at an awkward position, because then come year 3 and they haven't met your threshold, well, okay, I highly doubt you're gonna shut them, we can't shut them down, so that, we're not, there's
also
nothing
a
to encourage
reporting
them to be
requirement
successful.
for IDNR.
Pardon me?
Developers have to do reporting requirements for IDNR about the success of their plantings. If they sign up to get points under the adjustable block program for native pollinator plantings, it has to succeed to a certain extent according to the Department of Natural Resources standards. And if they don't, it's penalty or they lose their recs. Lose their recs. So then they would be unable to keep operating.
Okay, well, that is definitely a hammer. So because the recs are what you're selling, so that's actually a really good point.
So maybe let's do one more question and then we'll move on to have John talk about how it works. Does anybody else have a question for Scott? Okay.
I'll say afterwards, and like I said, if anybody's interested, we can go down and actually look at native plants out in front of the building. But thank you for your time, guys.
We have a lot of time for questions at the end too. But I'm going to introduce John Carson. He's going to talk about solar from the perspective of a developer in McHenry County and what it takes to develop from siting to interconnection capacities and what solar can do for us.
Awesome. Thank you, Jess. Nice to see everybody. As Jess mentioned, I'm a farm kid from Wisconsin. I grew up in southwest Wisconsin, south of La Crosse. I will admit that I did not know what a drain tile was because I moved to Illinois, because where I grew up, we have these things called hills. Water just runs off them. and not near as good a farm ground as we have here in Illinois. I am a Lake County resident, been in Highland Park for the last 10 years, but I'm a huge fan of McHenry County. I'll be taking my kids camping just north of Marengo at Thomas Woods this weekend. It's probably our 30th time camping there in the last 10 years. And just really proud of this incredible team that we've built here at Trajectory that works all across the state. We have 3 of them here today. McHenry County resident Abby Lewitsky, Matt Kapinski, who works in this area, and Hal Sprague. You've probably knocked on about 300 doors across McHenry County so far talking about our projects. Very excited about folks who are moving into Illinois to be part of this industry. These are some maps of all the projects we've developed. These are all projects that are already in good position on zoning, on interconnection, projects all over the state. We also do work in Maryland. One project, first one we developed that came online we'd love to talk about is Rockford Solar. This is right in the middle of the city. It's actually on an old landfill site. Was an open pit gravel mine. You have a lot of those here in McHenry County. Then it was an open pit dump. And now it has 7,000 solar panels on it that's putting energy onto the grid in Rockford. And actually this project is called an Illinois Solar for All project. So it's lowering utility costs for families with low incomes. One theme I really want to hit on today is the absolute central role that McHenry County specifically is going to play or can play here in Illinois for a couple reasons. First of all, there's different types of solar going on in Illinois. There's behind the meter. That's where a homeowner or a business or a school is directly powering their facility. McHenry County will absolutely be in the top 2 or 3, if not the #1 of behind the meter systems in the entire state of Illinois, mostly because you have newer housing stock. These more exurban counties have newer roofs. They do not put very many behind the meter systems on those old row houses in Chicago. City of Chicago will have the least solar per square foot of any city around. McHenry County will be easily in the top 10 for the number of community solar projects, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And you also have utility scale going on here. Now there's other counties that have different mixes, but there are very few that have 2 other things. First, a large professional staff at the county level who knows how to do this and can really get into the weeds. Lake County has a big, smart county government, but they don't have anywhere near as much of this going on. There are places like Lee County that have tons of solar going on, but a much smaller county staff. Probably the #1 renewable county in the entire state is gonna be a place called Mason County. 13,000 people live there. So McHenry County also has one other thing that I think is crucial to this, which is a very active and involved nonprofit sector. What the McHenry County Environmental Defenders bring to this is incredibly important. In fact, I think there's only 2 counties in the whole state that fit this description, and it would be McHenry County and Peoria County. Will County kind of has everything else going on, but they do not have an active advocacy nonprofit group. So I think I'm so glad to see this turnout, and I think you as a county can take an absolute leadership role in all this. So why is all this happening? First of all, this is a complicated looking chart, but here's what it means. The state of Illinois has made a policy decision to invest in solar. These are all the different categories and numbers of megawatts that support renewable energy here in the state. A large amount for residential systems and commercial and school systems, lots of opportunity for community solar. So this is what's happening at the state level. The best clean energy laws in the United States, no question about it. But then there's this map. You may have heard of something called the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed at the federal level to support renewable energy. It does so through tax credits, but they did something new with the Inflation Reduction Act. They said certain counties, certain census tracts are going to get higher support for renewables. This is Illinois. If the county or the census tract has any color on it, it gets a higher tax credit for that project. Look at Illinois compared to Missouri, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Indiana. Now, the Appalachians have lots of higher tax credits, but it's a little harder to put solar in the Appalachian Mountains. Illinois is this epicenter of an incredible state program, extra support from the federal government, and there's McHenry County right there. This is what's called an energy community. according to the Department of Energy. So that's the context of why this is happening broader. Now, why so much happening in McHenry County? You need two things to do ground-mounted solar: land and lines. On this chart, it's a little confusing. Gray means there's lots and lots of capacity on the lines. Pink means there's very little capacity on the lines, and that's sort of the scale. So of course, Lake County, Cook County, lots of capacity to put solar on those lines, not very much land. There are some different corridors with more capacity, but McHenry County really is that epicenter of you have high capacity lines to put solar onto, and you still have available land to put it on. Zooming in a little bit on McHenry County, McHenry County is kind of just like a microcosm of the whole state from this perspective. Lots of capacity on some of these lines, more in the southeast corner, which are highly populated, more demand on those lines. But you have some really important corridors out by Marengo, up by Harvard, where higher voltage lines are coming in from the west, dropping down to substations. Who here has visited the giant McHenry County, the Marengo substation as often as I have? It's like my favorite tour. I actually make my kids go see it when we go camping near Marengo. That substation, energy is coming in from coal plants all the way down along the Illinois River, from wind projects all the way to the Mississippi River. And from this substation here, half of DeKalb County, most of McHenry County, parts of Boone County are all fed out of that giant substation. That's why all of us solar developers are here. So what about the impacts of all of this? I'm a farm kid. I care about our agricultural economy, but we do need to talk about the change that the energy transition is bringing to farming. The fact of the matter is that about a third of our corn crop in Illinois is used for ethanol. As we all know, half the land's in corn, half the land's in soybean. So in any given year, 1/6 of those acres are not for eating, not for feeding the livestock, they're for driving your truck. And here's an example. I'll give you 250 bushels an acre. That'll produce almost 700 gallons of ethanol. You put that in a typical Ford F-150, get about 26 miles to the gallon. You drive almost 20,000 miles. Think about that. That's actually pretty good, right? An acre of corn, one season production, will drive a Ford F-150, 17,550 miles. Now, you take Ford F-150 Lightning, you put 1 acre of solar out there, that will produce enough kilowatt hours to drive that Ford F-150 Lightning 540,000 miles. And I didn't just pull this off the internet. I've got a Ford F-150 Lightning, it's in the parking lot. I've driven it 26,000 miles in the last year. So I only used one tiny little fraction of an acre. This transition is coming. We can debate whether or not electric vehicles will be successful. I think they will. And if you think about using our farm ground to drive vehicles, solar plus electric vehicles is a more efficient way to utilize those acres. What about the local economic benefits? A big one here is the labor that goes into these. No honest solar developer will be able to promise you exactly where all the panels are going to come from, all the other equipment will come from, but you are not importing the labor to build these things from overseas. And the majority of the value in a solar project that's spent is spent on the labor to install it. Our team at Trajectory always makes a commitment that these projects will be built with union labor. We're big believers that these should be creating high-paying jobs. I think one part that's underestimated a little bit is the impact on property taxes. Now, I do think this will be less of a big deal for McHenry County, which has a very healthy property valuation database base. But for a place like Mason County, with 13,000 residents and that much renewables going on, this is going to be a huge, huge impact. And then, of course, there's community solar subscriptions, which our team is going to be doing a lot of education to help make sure McHenry County residents can benefit from these. The very short version of community solar subscription is it's a straightforward way to save 10 to 15% on your electricity bills for signing some paperwork versus installing anything on your home. This is a zoom in here on the property tax impact. This is for a project we developed that hasn't been constructed yet, but it did go through the McHenry County ZBA and County Board. I think what's really interesting is compare the taxes that you see from farm ground when it's assessed at the agricultural rate versus solar, oftentimes 20 times more coming from renewables. And our solar projects are not asking for any investments from the county. We don't need curb and gutter installed. We don't need water or sewer or anything installed. We just pay much higher property taxes, and that is set by state law. That was a really good change in 2018 so that each county assessor doesn't need to figure this out separately. Scott mentioned this. I think this is another example where McHenry County can really lead, and I honestly think other counties will follow. As you guys put out policies, as you put out more details to your ordinance, whether it's pollinators and native plantings, whether it's smart co-use of the ground, this is something that the industry is figuring out, but when they get a good hard push from a smart county that has a plan that can give them certainty that they can follow, I think together we're going to make just a tremendous difference. It's really interesting to read some of the literature coming out of Minnesota, which is about 5 years ahead of us on this journey, and they are really seeing some just fantastic results where those pollinators have now been established 5, 6, 7 years, just the frankly thriving little mini ecosystems they're developing under those farms. A topic we did want to address that there are a lot of concerns about are, well, what does this mean for our groundwater? You have a very high groundwater table here in McHenry County. You have very porous bedrock, and what is the impact of these panels? I won't spend a lot of time on this right now, but we've actually got some printouts of a report that we commissioned really looking at this question of, is there leaching from solar panels into the groundwater? And the short answer is no, for a couple different reasons. One of them, and the tests that were done here were quite extensive, really over-exaggerating what could ever happen in the field. One example, though, that I love to show is what happened here in Nebraska. This was about as bad as it can get. This was literally softball-sized hail. Everyone always asks, what happens when hail comes? You know, your typical hail will bounce right off. You get up to golf ball, you might have a few panels that are damaged. This was softball size. And the important thing to look at here, not one of these panels in the entire field shattered. They cracked, but the pieces did not spread everywhere. They were all contained. And that was one of the major findings in this report that we worked on. Happy to dig into this more a little bit later. And then I wanted to mention another place where I think McHenry County already is, but can continue to be a leader that other counties and municipalities would copy, is on this question of decommissioning. Right now, all across the state, before we're issued a building permit, we have to put a bond in place so that the funds are there to decommission the site if the project were to go bankrupt, if the operator were to leave it. One just reality of the industry is once one of these things are built, if the company operating it were for some reason to go bankrupt, their lenders would quickly take over the project. Once they're built, they're a valuable asset. You just frankly don't see wind or solar projects sort of rusting out in the field. As many wind turbines as you've all seen driving around Illinois, you've never sort of seen one abandoned. From a commercial perspective, that just doesn't happen. But if it ever did, the funds would be there to decommission it. So happy to answer any questions or dig into a little more on any of these slides.
I'm going to ask you to dig in a little bit more. So going back to the native plantings conversation that Scott gave us, do you know if there's like an organization or a professional group that recommends qualified contractors? Is there like are developers able to find qualified individuals to manage these projects?
Yes. First of all, here in Illinois, we have something called the Illinois Solar Energy Association. Kirsten Sheets, one of our staff members, is on the board, and they really serve as a central clearinghouse for all of us utility scale, community solar, residential developers for questions just like that. The far and away leader from our perspective on all this right now is a company that started in Minnesota but now has an office in Princeville, Illinois called Natural Resources Solutions, NRS. They are really focused on developing smart seed mixes for these projects. I mean, this is a booming industry. The commercial seed developers have been really focused on solar, and I think based on all the commitments solar developers have made, the demand for this seed is only going to increase.
Back to the panel breakage and groundwater leaching conversation. So this comes up a lot at our hearings. People are very concerned about dangers to groundwater, the cadmium, the fuel in the transponders, all those things. Could you talk a little bit more about your experience and what the industry is seeing as far as any sort of groundwater damage?
The short version is we frankly are unaware of any reports of this project was built and now our water is testing differently. Now, to be fair, it is early. So I think studies like were referenced in the paper that we worked with a consultant to put together here are important to show, to create these sort of testing conditions as to what would actually happen, because it is a little early. The other side of this, and this, I get different reactions to this comment, but I did grow up on a farm, and I do know about the chemicals that we put on our farm ground as well. So I think that for McHenry County is a great place to, with the professional staff and advocacy groups, to look over time at that question of what's going into our rivers and groundwaters from pure agricultural inputs, what's coming out of these solar farms, that have pollinators established. What they're finding in Minnesota is that these are serving as really good recharge areas to capture stormwater and actually resulting in cleaner over water quality.
Can I ask you go back to the slide about Plowshare's tax benefits?
Yeah.
Now, like you said, there's no increase in population for these tax benefits. And can you explain a little bit about what developers do as regarding the fire squads and the fire district training and how that relationship works?
I think this is going to be really important. First of all, especially for sometimes our more rural counties or more rural townships, this is going to be, frankly, in a lot of the places we work, not McHenry County, but in a lot of places, this is the #1 source of new property tax revenue. It's set by the state. For those fire districts, you'll notice here, City of Marengo is not on here because it's outside of the city, but the fire district is. So first of all, it's, for those fire districts, that's a sizable increase in property taxes. But our team, Mac here, Mac, you've personally led tours of local fire districts out at some of the solar farms that we've developed. Do you want to say a quick word on sort of how they're thinking about it?
Yeah, sure. So it's actually pretty simple, believe it or not, for the most part. What we're doing when we're talking to the fire department is showing them around, showing them where the various equipment is, showing them where the shutoff switch is, how to get in to the locked gate. But then because solar farms aren't typically capable of self-sustaining a fire, for the most part, the guidance is just to spray around it with water and let it burn itself out.
So we've done that engagement with fire districts here in McHenry County, and I think this is a really important thing for counties to really push for.
Right, when we have people come to the zoning hearings and talk about the risks of fire, I don't think that it's commonly understood that they're not self-sustaining. So could you explain that a little bit more, that it's not going to be a widespread conflagration?
One really important part is for these projects that have pollinators underneath them, at the end of the growing season, you do mow this completely. A typical prairie, of course, you would burn. Cannot do that under a solar farm. So at the end of the growing season, all of this vegetation is removed. In the spring, it grows back up. So you are not creating sort of a, year after. If you've got a prairie and you never burn it, you never mow it, you build up all that vegetation, that's not happening at these solar farms. So outside of the vegetation, the panels themselves are not flammable. This is all metal racking systems, so there's just not a lot there that would burn, frankly.
Another question that came in throughout the registration process was about tornado damage to solar farms. Have we seen any of that happening?
We have not yet. There was, so these solar farms are rated to 140 mile an hour straight line winds, and we haven't seen any examples yet. You know, and this is just purely anecdotal, but everyone was aware of the horrible incident in Belvedere where the theater roof collapsed during some very high straight line winds. There's a 5-acre rooftop system about 3 blocks away from that that sustained no damage when that happened. Now I can't attest to, you know, did the straight line wind hit that solar panel rooftop system as hard as it hit the theater, but I did think it was an interesting observation.
Awesome. Another question that came up multiple times actually was about decommissioning and recycling materials.
Yeah, this I'm pretty excited about. I think there's going to be multiple additional industries that are created from this clean energy revolution that's going on. One is just the people who mow these things. You don't bring them in from out of state. Those are all local contractors that are mowing these, creating jobs. On the recycling side, you're seeing the industry just respond really quickly to this. One of our partners at Trajectory, in fact, an investor in the company is ERI. It's the largest electronic recycling company in the country. They are rapidly getting into being prepared to recycle these panels. There will be a lag time. California's at the front end of this because they installed the most panels 30, 40 years ago when they're going to be recycled. But everyone is preparing for what's coming here in Illinois. The bottom line is 80% of what you have here is just already simple recyclable materials, glass and aluminum. And an industry and it's being built up to recycle the rest.
One thing I think would be worth talking about too is as you're looking at developing solar in McHenry County, if you could go back to the slide that shows the interconnection availability.
Yeah.
What are the average per acre lease rates in the areas that are available for interconnection?
So let's talk about this for a second. So in the solar process, if you heard a neighbor say, I'm talking to a guy about solar, there's maybe a 5% chance that project's going to get built. If they actually signed a lease, now maybe there's a 15-20% chance that project's actually going to get built. If they came through zoning, it may take a while, but the majority of those projects will ultimately get built. What drives it all is there space on the line for those projects. And that is basically 3-dimensional chess. As developers, we can't actually apply for our spot until we have what's called site control. We have a signed lease with someone, and projects are in and out of the queue. We keep a very, very, very close eye on this, and with the landowners that we work with, really try to set expectations of, here's our plan to make your project work. Until the day I hand you the first rent check, I cannot guarantee this project is definitely going to get turned on. So there's all those factors weigh into it. The short answer to your question, Jess, is lease rates, you know, can be as low as $1,000 an acre, as high as $2,200, $2,500 an acre. But what we always try to talk to landowners about is it actually going to get built? Sometimes, you know, there is a saying that the barrier to entry to being a solar developer is a trip to Kinko's to print your business card. So if you're thinking about this, if you're interested in solar on your own land, working with someone who has a plan to be there through the long haul and actually get these projects built versus just somebody offered me $3,000, $4,000 an acre. That might be what your lease says, but we'll see if that rent check ever comes.
Right, so you can sign a lease and continue to row crop it until it's time for construction.
Yeah.
And when you're doing these projects with farmers who have large areas of land, or even like municipalities, I know you've done some municipal projects, how does that impact their bottom line? Like if you're doing a 5 megawatt project, how much money is that in their pocket per year, and how are they benefiting from it?
Oh, that's a great question. We really see sort of 2 different sides of that. One is that for landowners who maybe own a few hundred acres, many thousands of acres, they see this as hedging. It's guaranteed income once that project's built that they know that they can count on. Frankly, a lot of the farmers that we work with, maybe none of their kids are actually interested in taking over the farm, but this will be a way that the land can keep producing income. Other side that we see is when you do have a landowner who has some land that there's no higher use. A couple of our team members today were in Dixon, Illinois, where the park district itself had 24 acres of subprime farm ground that they're going to put a solar farm on that we developed with them. They are receiving over $2 million over the next 20 years in direct benefits, cheaper electricity, rent payments. I think in their particular case, it's really subprime farm ground. They were only getting like $200 an acre a year for it, and now we'll be making over $1,500.
So the Park District is the primary subscriber to their own community solar farm. All of their energy comes from their solar.
Yep.
And they're getting the benefits of the rent check.
Yes. We believe, someone could correct me if we're wrong, but we think it'll be the first 100% solar powered park district in the state.
Wow.
Dixon, Illinois.
Those were most of the questions that were submitted prior. Cindy, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on John's description. To be a solar developer, you just need to get a card printed. So are solar developers vetted, licensed by the state in any way?
At a couple levels. So if you are a vendor who's participating in this program, the state does vet them. If you are telling a homeowner, I can get you a state subsidy to put solar on the roof, it's happening at that level. Anyone who's installing solar does have to go through certifications, both as qualified electricians at that level. But at the level of, I'm talking to a landowner about leasing their land, there isn't really a state certification at that early stage. So, there's sort of natural vetting that ultimately goes on. I think McHenry County is a great example of an unsophisticated developer in front of your ZBA and with your professional staff probably wouldn't make it through.
Thanks.
How does the solar farm affect the ComEd grid specifically? Is that something that is dealt with at the permit level, or you have to go to ComEd before you even go to get a permit?
Yes, no, that's a really important question. The short version is it's tremendously helpful to the ComEd grid. Our entire electric grid is all built around 1 hour a year. Our entire electric grid is to prepare for that, whatever day it ends up being, that sunniest, hottest day where everyone's air conditioners are on. It actually often ends up being in September because it's when the schools are full. Summer can be hotter, but the schools aren't full. So they have to build lines that, under our old system, they have to build lines that get energy from those nuke plants, those gas plants, those coal plants, all the way out to everyone's home. What we work on here is called distributed energy, rooftop systems and community solar systems sort of spread out all over. So on that peak energy day, they're putting energy onto the grid just at the moment. That's the nice thing about solar. Its peak production is that same hot sunny day that everyone's got their air conditioners on. And what we have to do with ComEd is an interconnection study that looks at the following. What is the maximum amount of electrons we might be putting on the grid theoretically on the sunniest day? What is the lowest demand on their system? That's what they're measuring against to see would we fry their substations. And so they're hyper conservative, they're hyper careful to make sure when we say we got interconnection permission, that means ComEd has certified that if we connect our system, their lines and their substations could handle it even at their lowest demand.
On that vein, are you guys looking at battery storage sites around here or just?
Yes, this is very exciting. Our first battery system we developed is in Pekin, Illinois. It's going to be a 2 megawatt community solar project with a 4 megawatt hour battery system. McHenry County is actually a leader on this front as well. The first operational battery system is actually just west of Marengo. Some of you may have seen it. Illinois is also, we're not involved in this, but all of our coal plants, most of our coal plants up and down the Illinois River are being converted from coal to solar plus storage. Often some of them 30 to 50 megawatt hour battery systems. We are going to have, when that is done in about 5 years, We're going to have the most sophisticated grid in North America, right here in Illinois. Has McHenry County passed a battery ordinance yet?
We have not. We do allow for it as an accessory use to a solar farm, but not as a standalone principal use on a property yet.
That's something some counties are starting to make sure they have special battery ordinances in place too. It's just an incredible asset to the grid.
You have none planned in McHenry?
We don't, no. Right now, McHenry still has plenty of capacity on its grid for what you might call the sort of existing demand on those peak days, but I'm sure you've had some applications already include that.
For the battery storage,
Yeah.
we've had a lot of inquiries about it, but we actually have not seen any applications
Okay.
for it.
Yeah.
Two things on that point. I have solar in my house and I can't get battery backup yet because the ordinance, I'm thinking that's why they're not allowing me to get battery backup.
You should be allowed to as an accessory use.
Could you please repeat the questions?
Oh, I'm sorry. You were asking about getting battery storage on your property for the solar that you have on your?
I just want a battery backup system when the power goes out that they can take it off the battery, and I had to apply for that through the company with Sunrun. They said it's not allowed yet. I'm on a waiting list for that.
I'm not aware of any reason why that wouldn't be allowed. We just don't allow a battery energy storage system as a standalone use on a vacant property by itself.
All right, I'll double check.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Are you in a city, sir? Or where do you live?
Wonder Lake.
Is it unincorporated or in the village?
I'm incorporated in the village.
In the village, that might be why. They might have different regulations through the village.
I will check. I have a question from the village now.
Could you speak up?
Can you speak up?
Try speaking loud enough.
Well,
for
we're going
people
to have
to
to have the question repeated, please.
My voice doesn't carry. Look for any information that identifies the minimum electrical infrastructure necessary to receive the output of the solar farm.
Short version is a 3-phase line. And often when you think of a community solar project, you picture the big transmission line. We actually just hook up to the single wooden pole with the crossbar at the top, 3-phase line.
3-phase line.
3-phase, and then we have to do a study with ComEd to make sure there's enough capacity. Just one really fun story on the whole battery thing. We really do have sophisticated smart policies here in Illinois. Has anyone else signed up for real-time pricing? So with real-time pricing, you pay whatever the going rate is, and they tell you, oh, you should not run your dryer right now because electricity is expensive. It actually sometimes goes negative. So right now, sometimes I charge my truck at home, and I get paid to do it because the price of electricity is negative at that time. I don't have a home battery system yet either, but when I do, I'll be able to set it up to capture that energy, because what's going on there is the grid has too much energy, and they're sending out a price signal to tell people, use energy now, we need it off the grid. Our new plants run 24/7 and the wind blows strongest at night. So with a battery system, I'll be able to program it to store those electrons when they're selling them and get paid to charge my truck.
That's how it works.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
Yes.
A quick question on bonding.
Yes.
We're at 100% bonding for?
Correct, 100%.
100%. And if they have to use any part of that bond for whatever reason, and yet they still continue to do work on parts, so some part isn't being used and something happens and they have to use part of that bonding, does the next time it's reviewed bring it back up to 100%?
Let's repeat the question. So Mary's asking if part of the solar farm is abandoned and the bond is collected, what happens? Do they have to bring the bond back up to 100% with the county? What happens with keeping that on file?
The decommissioning cost does need to be reevaluated every 10 years. And if the cost for decommissioning at that point of what is remaining is increased, we would ask for a new bond at that time. So as far as I know, it's just every 10 years that it would be reevaluated.
And it's at 100% because the state has said 100%.
Correct.
Because I know a lot of other things like gravel pits and things like that, it's 110 or 150 or 100.
Right, it was 150% until the state laws that were passed last year went up to 100%.
Thank you.
But municipalities can require more.
That's right.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so the current grid that's in place, do you feel it's going to be able to support the 52, well, I know we've got some up and running, Will it support the 52 solar projects in our county at this point?
Well, here's where this gets really interesting. So when we say to ComEd, hey, we'd like to put a solar project here in Riley Township, will you do that study? To be more precise, they don't actually ever say yes or no. What they say to us is, well, if you want to put it right there, here's what it would cost you. And sometimes it's very simple and straightforward, and they say, we just need to put this equipment in, there's room on the grid, and that will cost you $450,000. That is as cheap as a single community solar interconnection is ever going to be. They don't actually ever say no. What they say is, well, the Marengo substation is full now, so if you really wanted to build that solar farm, you'd have to run an 8-mile line all the way to Crystal Lake, and that would cost you $13 million, but then you could build your solar farm. Now, nobody's going to build a 8-mile line for a 5-megawatt project at $13 million. But we have a project in Kankakee where we are going to pay $1.9 million to run a new line all the way back through the city so we can put a 3.5 megawatt project on the edge of town. And every resident along that line is going to benefit from a brand new, shiny, 3-phase, 12 kV line. So in some sense, in a real sense, the solar industry is paying to harden our grid, is paying to upgrade our grid. I suspect there might be some other solar developers in the room. We're responsible for those upgrades. And ComEd, as I said, is very conservative in these studies. They look at the worst case scenario, and if you can't meet that, you don't get the baseline interconnection. They tell you the upgrades you'd have to pay to the system in order to connect your project.
So would there ever be a time where a solar company would look at an area and say, wow, there's 52 solar in this square mile area, it wouldn't make sense for us to go there? You know what I mean?
That's correct, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, we have projects that we've looked at and haven't brought through zoning because we don't have interconnection results yet.
In that same vein, John, there's been a lot of concern that we're gobbling up our farmland for solar.
Yeah.
Now, given the state of ComEd and the interconnection capacity, what is the actual percentage of solar? Like, when will we reach too much?
Yes, the way to think about this is like, let's say McHenry County adopted a policy that said you wanted to cover every last square inch you possibly could in solar, but it would be limited by the lines that you have. It would be limited by reasonable upgrades, like no one's going to pay for a $13 million line from Riley to Crystal Lake. If you did all of that, in other counties, we've actually done the math on this. In Livingston County, which has about twice as much farmland, but has a very robust grid because of where it is, the maximum amount of solar you could ever see, the maximum amount of farmland ever put into solar would be 6%. I suspect for McHenry County, it wouldn't be higher than 10 to 12%. If you took, we've got our Plowshare project down here south of Marengo. Because there's a 12 kV line that runs all the way back to that sub, our project is 5 megawatts. That line can handle 20 megawatts. It's full now, and there's thousands of acres on either side of it, and only room for about 4 projects of 50 acres each.
So you said that we're going to be a leader in the state in having so much solar, but it's really only going to, if we did every possible solar that we could do, solar farm we could do, it would be less than 15% of our total farmland.
Yes. Has anyone ever done the math on how many acres of
I was gonna say, what's the
farmland
total
are
farmland?
under?
Yeah.
I think it's in the 2050 plan, isn't it?
10,000.
It is, but I don't.
You don't have it memorized?
That is not.
But it's in the 2050 plan, which is now live on the county website, and you could get that information for yourself.
I have a question regarding this. There's a solar farm, I think, going up in Richmond, Illinois. Where is that on this?
Where is,
grid?
I'm not sure.
It's Solon.
It's
up in the,
Oh, Richmond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We actually have
It's in
two
the
projects.
green, it's in one of the green spots.
Yeah.
There's 2 under construction in Richmond. Are you talking about the one on Solon Road and?
Well, both.
Oh,
Because I just noticed them coming in the process and was wondering.
The future that you'll see is,
In the county.
no one's ever going to find 50 acres in this quarter to put solar on, but we'll start to see more community solar projects on roofs. Eventually, you'll see parking lots. with solar over them, and all that would make sense.
So that's an important point to make. As McHenry County expands as a logistics hub, which is another area where we're really rapidly expanding, we could start requiring rooftop solar.
That would be fantastic.
Right. And we would see less farmland being used for it, but the lines in that area in particular, so like in Crystal Lake, in McHenry, in those areas that have more population, those would be good candidates still to do interconnection.
Fantastic.
Right.
And I'd like to throw this idea out, because I know we have some people from municipalities, even if we don't require solar on top of rooftops for new development, we can require solar ready. So to run conduit in a house when it's under construction is maybe 20 bucks worth of conduit. If you're trying to do that after the house is built, you're talking significant money. So there's a cost savings by making that a requirement at a municipal level right now for new homes or new businesses to at least have it solar ready.
Well, and in that same vein, you could encourage them to subscribe to these community solar farms. And that's another question I wanted to throw back at you, John. How, as we're seeing these projects go up, how do we get information about subscribing? Yes.
The short version is to work with developers like us, but I would really encourage, to the degree it can, the county, to the degree it can, the defenders, maybe your economic development officers. You can't preference one company, but you can be sort of a hub of connecting people. The reality is that when community solar started in Illinois, people had questions about it. They wondered if it was going to really work. Was it kind of a scam? And it was really hard to get the first people to sign up. Hal here on our team, Hal, you've helped over 500 residential homeowners go with community solar.
Sign me up.
Those are some long conversations. It has flipped now. The demand for community solar is higher than the supply because everyone has realized how simple this is. The largest community solar subscriber outside of the Chicagoland area is OSF Healthcare. If you think about OSF Healthcare, they enormous electric demand. I mean, those hospitals just use up electricity. And they don't really have good roofs for solar. They don't necessarily have good campuses for solar. So they're subscribing to community solar and they're taking every kilowatt hour they can get. Another example is people who maybe own 50 Casey's across the state, use a lot of electricity. Those coolers use a lot of electricity, don't really have, maybe they're just leasing the spot, don't have a good roof. They're all signed up for community solar now.
So you're saying that residents and business owners and churches and schools and municipalities and counties can sign up for community solar?
Yes, and the best way to do that would be to find the right way in McHenry County to organize amongst yourself so that you can actually negotiate for a higher savings rate.
Can you explain that? Because in some cases, people are being offered like 7% reduction, 10%. I mean, it's kind of like the wild, wild west. How do you find the best deal for you?
As an individual, it can be difficult. There still are some subscriptions out there for 15%. Trajectory has a project that we mentioned, Plowshare Solar, that when this project moves forward, we committed to a 20% savings for this project, and we also committed that all the subscribers would be in McHenry County. So we'll probably be subscribing this end of 2025. So the state is pushing projects towards that. But it is a market thing, and the best way to get the best deal for the most people would be to sort of pool and aggregate the demand. I've seen a lot of economic development offices really take this on.
And chambers, maybe?
Chambers, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of chambers out here. Nancy.
I'd like to go back to the farm issue for a moment. I grew up on a farm in Iowa, and my brother, who was older than me, would have loved to gone into farming with my father, but there was not enough money. The farm wasn't generating enough money for him to do that. So my family would have welcomed solar farm or wind turbines on our property because that would have been some guaranteed income that might have allowed my brother to stay there with his family for 25 to 30 years. My question is, after that I know there are though people that are very concerned about using farmland in this way, but after that 25 to 30 years, once that solar farm is decommissioned, could someone explain whether that farmland will then be better for farming in the future or worse for farming in the future?
Scott, do you have a...
Well, so part of what we talked about was the restoration of soil health. So the native plants will be putting carbon back in the ground and increasing the soil health. One of the ways that it can be viewed is a conservation reserve program. So this is something that's already done with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. It's primarily with erodible soils or soils that are being degraded, but they will set it aside on 10-year increments and plant natives on it to restore the soil. And so this is essentially serving as a conservation reserve program. At the end of that 25, 30-year period, they can go back and put it into production, and the soils will be infinitely more productive than they were beforehand.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So under the agricultural mitigation agreement, you're required, can you explain some of the requirements for decommissioning as it relates to land restoration?
The state of Illinois has a very robust Department of Agriculture, and this law, Agriculture Impact Mitigation Agreement, which was really built out when wind started being more impactful, but it's been adjusted to solar now. It requires at the state level, first of all, that we have one of these bonds in place. So if for some reason a county wasn't requiring that, the state steps in and says that has to be there. They are incredibly focused on drain tile. You have to have a plan to make sure that your drain tile is working, which frankly, we want that as a solar operator. We do not want broken drain tile and water pooling in there. So that really is one area that I think there's mutual agreement, and I think as these, you mentioned, Sky, you haven't seen any flooding around anyone's projects that they've built so far. One thing we often do on our projects is we'll install inspection risers on the outside of the fence so that if a neighboring landowner wasn't sure if the water was flowing through the solar farm, they'd be able to take a look through that inspection riser. And then the AMA also has, it's a pretty lengthy document, and we have to have it in place before we get our building permit.
And what are the penalties for not following the AMA?
That, I mean, you could lose your permit, and then the county would have the right to decommission the system. That's the ultimate thing that keeps us solar developers on the straight and narrow.
That and the penalties of like losing your RECs. There are certain scenarios
That's
where
right,
you can
yeah.
really screw up and lose your RECs.
Exactly.
And how financially devastating is that for a developer?
Oh, you'd go, the project would be in very serious trouble.
Maybe can you guys explain RECs? Because that's something.
Sorry, yeah, no, you're right.
So when you have a solar farm or a wind farm, you're producing two different things. You're producing electricity, and then you're producing renewable energy credits. I like to think of it as the bragging rights. So when the state of Illinois said, we want Ameren and ComEd to get to X percentage of renewables, and we're putting this program in place to do it, let's say you're a homeowner who's put solar on your roof. Sir, did you get the check from the state of Illinois subsidy?
No.
Oh, you didn't?
That didn't come from me, no. That is, company just puts it up, no.
They used it, though,
Right.
in order to subsidize your program. So here's the interesting thing. Technically, it is illegal for you to tell your neighbor that you use solar power. That subsidy, you sold your RECs to ComEd. The way I explain it is you sold your bragging rights. Now, there is no police that is ever going to bother you about this. No one is ever going to say, you told your neighbor you're using solar power, but you got money from ComEd. They bought your bragging rights. But when a school goes solar, they're usually a little more careful with the press release. And what's interesting is Google, Amazon, Facebook, all the big data centers, they are incredible purists on this. They will not sell their RECs to the state and then say that they're using solar power. So it's kind of a complicated financial mechanism to, make sure that we're actually supporting homeowners, supporting schools. But technically, you are selling your bragging rights, you are selling your RECs to the utility.
So when this company that I'm dealing with tells me if I can get somebody else to, if I tell somebody else and then they'll give me a credit,
Yep.
that's illegal.
No, well, I bet if you read the fine print, I bet if you read the pamphlets they give you, It doesn't say, I use solar power, you should too. It will say something like, I'm supporting the development of renewable energy here in Illinois, you should too. If you actually read the language, they're careful about it.
Well, so to back up just a little bit, John, if your 5 megawatt solar project is approved by the state,
Yeah.
how much money then goes to the developer, and that's what helps build the project and get it off the ground? Can you explain that?
This, for a typical homeowner or a community solar project, the support from the state covers about a third of the cost of the solar farm. The income stream, when we build a community solar project, there's 3 different income streams. There's this support from the state, there's the federal tax credit, and then there's selling the community solar credit, selling the electricity.
But if it's not approved by the state, and it's not like, like Duke is obviously not getting
Yes.
state recs, but it's utility scale. So if it's a smaller project and you don't get the recs, then the likelihood that you will have the funds to build.
So that has changed.
Oh.
That has changed in the last year. You are now, so utility scale projects typically are not getting any money from the state of Illinois because they're selling their energy to Facebook, Google, or Amazon, they want to keep the bragging rights. They want to keep those recs. But because of this map, you are now starting to see community solar projects that do not take a penny from the state. And when they sell to in some cases, they're actually selling to Facebook and Amazon and others, they get to say they're using solar power. So we're actually starting to work on some of these in McHenry County. Because of the additional federal support, we think we can forego the state support. And then, right now, when we sell a subscription to OSF Healthcare, they have to be very careful and say, we're supporting the renewable energy movement here in Illinois. They can't say we're using solar power. If we build one of these in McHenry that does not take any money from the state, we can sell those racks to OSF Healthcare, and they can say, we're using solar power from McHenry County.
It's a little Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Deer in headlights.
It's really not something
Green shirt.
you need to worry about.
Yeah, so let's fast forward to 2050 and these facilities that have reached their end of useful life, can they be renewed upon replacement? Does ComEd's kind of adapted their grid now to have all this, web of solar out there? What happens then?
This is really important, and it might be a little early to prepare for it, but not too early. There's 3 very different important things. Every lease has an expiration on it. Nobody signs a permanent lease. Some solar companies, and we're starting to do this, they do actually buy the land, so there's that. But the lease has an expiration after which you have to remove the system, and if you don't, you can access the bond. Your CUPs have an expiration as well, or are they permanent?
They do not for solar farms.
They do not. The other thing that is permanent is that interconnection point. Once you have permission to interconnect to the grid, that is permanent. So what I think is going to happen is that probably be a different landowner, 30, 40 years, probably be a different owner of the solar system, but these are going to be highly valuable sites, and the landowner is going to be in the catbird seat and probably get who knows what kind of offer, because that interconnection point, and at that point, you'll probably be able to produce twice as much power off the same amount of land. But the county will want to be prepared to address that when we hit that point.
The question was, in 50 years, are they going to decommission these farms, or are they going to replace and repair?
I think there'll be a strong desire to replace and repair.
Yes.
John, thanks for your time. My name's Kevin. I'm in the building department here at the county and do the reviews for solar farms. I work with Kim and Scott. And I just had a couple of questions. One is the the battery storage, and the other having to do with something along the same lines, which is the grid format, and as far as the substations go. So, you spoke of the chain of coal being switched, which is fabulous, right? So, with that, the power lines and the substations required for that, and do you not see like substation growth in the area as well, and maybe battery storage along with that?
Here's the story I like to tell about this. So do you know why railroad tracks are so narrow? Have you ever stood at like the metro lines and said, why in the world are they so narrow? The metro trains hanging out over both sides? When they invented trains in England in the 1830s, they invented the steam power, and they're like, look, this would be great. And they got some cart builders to build the first carts. And they said, well, we've been building roads since the Roman days. You know how wide they are? As wide as 2 horses. So the first railroad tracks were laid as wide as 2 horses. They made the width the same as a cart. Very shortly, they realized, oh my God, we should have made this wider. But they'd already laid a few hundred miles of track. So they just kept building the same thing. There are a few countries, Russia has changed it, Spain has made wider gauge, but all across America, we have railroad tracks that are too narrow. It's the bane of railroad engineers. That's our substation system. No, we are not going to be building big, giant new substations almost anywhere. They're just incredibly hard to site. They're incredibly hard to find land for. We've built this just beautiful grid. So we're stuck with it. This is my personal opinion as a solar developer and engineer, but that's okay. In McHenry County, we will strengthen our grid. We will reconductor certain lines. We will add an extra transformer to a substation here or there. And I'm being a little more specific to McHenry County. There are wind farms in central Illinois that build a big giant new substation for a utility scale project. But I think in a place like McHenry, Lake, DeKalb, Winnebago, for the most part, we're going to reinforce the grid that was built back in the 50s and 60s, because somebody at ComEd knew somebody with land on the west side of Marengo instead of the east side, and that's where it is.
So along with that, there may be some development with, as an engineer, you understand, appreciate, technology. So, the connectivity efforts. So, the substations themselves might get redeveloped. And the routing, right? So
the physical locations of them, I think, will stay the same, but the infrastructure will get better, for sure. We'll see if I'm wrong, and they pop a big giant substation between Harvard and Marengo.
What do you think about BESS with that?
Oh, it's just exciting, but it's reinforcing what I talked about. Because of the big substation west of Marengo, the largest BESS system in northern Illinois is a half mile away. And that's supporting that substation and making it stronger. So it's just reinforcing this hardening of our existing grid versus building a brand new one.
The question was, what was his opinion on battery storage systems coming online?
They need to go in the right place, but it's just going to make for a fabulously resilient grid.
I had a question. Are solar developers actually purchasing real estate themselves, or do they always lease? And then are the terms of the leases ever negotiable in terms of like the landowner still having some control or say within the maintenance of that land or use of it underneath the solar panels?
So the question was, are solar developers purchasing land, and how are the terms of the lease negotiated?
The short version is about 90%, I'd say, of projects right now are leases, but I think purchase options is what we call them are increasing. A developer would rarely just buy a parcel and then see if it works. They would do an option for a purchase. And absolutely, everything in a lease is negotiable. If you're thinking about it, it's really been interesting. The Farm Bureau of Illinois puts out a list of the top 10 renewable energy lawyers in the state to represent landowners. There are many lawyers across the state now who their primary focus is representing landowners in these negotiations. There are things that we will tell you that isn't commercially viable for the project, but don't let anyone tell you there's some legal reason something can't be negotiated.
Okay. And then lastly, is there maintenance on a regular basis to the panels that needs to be done, and cleaning and things like that? How often are maintenance workers in there doing that?
I want to repeat the question. Is there maintenance to the panels that needs to be done regularly? Do we have to go out and clean them? What happens with the site once it's done?
Top reason people are out there is mowing, and it's a really fun, interesting industry that's a commercial sector that's standing up around that. The systems are monitored remotely, so if a row goes out or a panel goes out, someone does come out to fix it. But you really don't see people cleaning them here in the Midwest. We get enough rain that technically, if you washed them every morning, they produce slightly more energy, but that would be expensive and use a lot of water. We get enough rain in the Midwest that people really don't schedule that in.
Red hat.
What about snow?
Yeah, oh man, I wish I had that picture on here. Falls right off is the short version. There are going to be days that it snows enough that the panels are covered and they're not producing electricity. We sort of bake that into our assumptions of what they'll produce. But these systems that turn, they're 60 degrees in the morning. I've got some great pictures we didn't put in here of, 8 o'clock the morning after 8 inches of snow. Panels are free of snow and slightly more clean.
Nancy.
Well, having grown up with sheep on a farm, I know that sheep will graze right down to the ground. And I'm just wondering how compatible, I'd like to hear from the sheep people, how compatible will sheep raising, or not raising, sheep grazing, when there's pollinator plants there? How do we work that out so that they don't destroy the pollinator plants?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Brooke Watson. This is my husband, Chauncey. We're part of Watson Farms out of DeKalb. We've entered into this incredible world of agrivoltaics and vegetation management using what we call solar grazing with sheep. So why sheep? We get that question a lot. Cattle are too big, goats are too destructive. Sheep are the perfect size and a great temperament. We're one of the largest sheep farms in the state, and to our knowledge, we're probably going to be the first ones actually with sheep on solar sites north of Springfield. That'll happen sometime this year. Great question. It has to do with, you want to be working with a experienced sheep farmer. We'll have grazing plans. We'll utilize rotational grazing. We are with our partners, all of our partners. We're going to be grazing 150 acres this year. They're all using the pollinator mixes, and it'll be an ongoing, discussion and monitoring about making sure that the plants aren't being overgrazed. So some of them, and we're working with a vegetation management company out of Minnesota. It's not Natural Resources, it's MNL. And they've, Minnesota, is at the forefront in how to, reach your pollinator goals and your land use goals with this. And they're developing very good grazing models that is going to be a great example for us to follow to make sure that we aren't overgrazing. Sheep they're more sustainable, a little bit better for the environment than bringing out mowers. A study from Colorado State last year actually found that if you're using sheep as your vegetation management, there's less damage long-term to the panels, because inevitably when you're mowing, rocks get slung up, or if you're having to crawl under panels for those hard-to-reach spots, with an operator, that's when some accidents can happen. So landowners, you do have a say if you are really interested in using or want sheep and as part of your vegetation management plan. You can talk to the contractors you're working with. If your energy company is already given the vegetation management rights to another company, you can advocate for them that you want solar grazing as part of it with the sheep, and we're a great resource then to partner. We do also have our own commercial mowing business, so anything that the sheep don't get that does need additional mowing or spraying, we're licensed and capable to do that, and that will be part of our plan. Yeah, Chauncey?
The prairies were grazed by buffalo, elk, deer before, European contact, so.
But sheep will graze.
They will, and anything if you overgrazing is not good, and any animal will do that too, sheep.
Just to elaborate on that a little bit, and just to show how much they are paying attention to this particular topic. So the American Grazing Association, Solar Grazing Association, and others are looking at not only sheep but pigs. And they've settled on a specific breed of pig because the nose shape does not allow them to actually take the plant all the way down to the root. So this is a topic that is really getting a lot of attention.
Yes, sir. We'll do 2 more questions and then we'll wrap up. Yes, sir.
This has to do with Scott, actually. As far as the grazing is concerned, how do we incorporate the grazing in our application for the permit? Does that affect the permit application?
It'll affect the review. To be honest, this has more to do with your arrangement with ComEd. That's why, all of a sudden, once ComEd actually, was it points that they provided? What's the benefit?
It's the Adjustable Block Program provided.
So, that, all of a sudden, everybody wanted to do grazing. But as part of our review, we will definitely look, what is the solar mix or the seed mix? What is the management plan? Because the management plan for solar grazing is going to be very different than it is for, just native plants. So, we're going to be looking to make sure that it's an actual plan that's going to be able to be implemented over time and not just something that's being done just to check a checkbox off. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Stacy.
How about chickens?
There are some that are using chickens. The biggest issue with chickens is, predators are more of a factor, and they're probably going to need to be on site for most of the growing season to be effective, whereas sheep, there are some sites that like the idea of having them on all year, growing season year, and rotating them, but we're mostly going to be utilizing a mob grazing style where you'll go in with a high number of sheep, like over 100 for 2 weeks and meet the grazing goals and be done. So you need more chickens to do that, and they're possible.
Yeah, not chickens to control the vegetation, but to take advantage of the space under the thing for the benefit of the chickens. Some chicken poop.
I think there's research being done on that.
There's research being done on bees too. Bees is agrivoltaics, so it's changing. It's the wild, wild west. So. Yeah.
There's a lot of area under rights of way where the high power lines go through in Crystal Lake. Is there an ability to put solar panels in some of those unused areas for communities and things like that?
Right now, the answer would be no. ComEd's approach to those right-of-ways is those are very critical infrastructure, and if there was ever a problem, they need unimpeded access to get in there. That said, I think as we go through the stages here, there's going to be interesting things that happen. Right now, an engineer will tell you that you could build solar in a certain type of floodplain. The banker will tell you no way, no how. So I think we're going to see an evolution here. Further, states like Hawaii and New Jersey are kind of at the front end of this. California's got all the desert it needs to put its solar in, plus rooftops, but New Jersey, for instance, has highways where almost every light pole has a single solar panel on it. So the more space-constrained places have been the leaders on this, and starting to see some interesting stuff. But I think ComEd right-of-ways will be one of the last places we put them, unfortunately.
Well, why would that be? I mean, you talk about access. The chances of having a truck even in there, and I don't think I've ever seen one.
I think we could eventually get there. It's just, I think we have a
is there
lot
some
of lower hanging fruit to get through first.
There's also natural gas lines and.
That's exactly right. Oftentimes.
Under structures underneath all of that.
One last question. Okay.
Yeah, John, do you just build, your organization just build, or do you actually market the actual power that those farms create?
We do all those different pieces in conjunction with a lot of partners. As I mentioned, Hal here is an expert at educating people on community solar. Mac works with our landowners and with our zoning boards and others, and then we work with a lot of building trades partners.
And do other people who want to sell community solar come to you and contract as well?
That's right, and again, that has really flipped here in Illinois. There is more demand now as people realize this is paperwork to reduce my utility bill by about 10%, and nobody has to ever go on my roof.
Well, that's all she wrote, folks. Thank you so much for coming. There is information about clean energy on the defenders table. There's the study John mentioned over here, our memo, and